How would you feel if you woke up tomorrow and you found out that Goldman Sachs did buy $10 billion of Bitcoin and UAE bought $20 billion of Bitcoin? By the way, your Bitcoin would be trading at like $4 million of Bitcoin. Satoshi's innovation is real, which is another way to say we have created truly decentralized digital property in cyberspace that is not owned and controlled by any company, any individual, or any government. We have common property, pari passu, gold or land or commodities. That's the first innovation. You heard the most informed criticism was, Ray Dalio's, well, it's so good, someone's going to ban it. First it was, well, I don't get it, I don't like it, it's bad. And then it became, I guess it's not bad. And then it became, well, I guess it's not going away and it works, but it works too well. Then it became a Jamie Dimon, Ray Dalio. It's just too good. Even Frank Giestra. Eventually, everybody kind of revolved around or settled upon the narrative. Yeah, it's not bad. It's good, but it's too good. And that's why I'm afraid of it. I think in the last 6 months, right, we see, in fact, the opposite's happened. The administration's in favor. We've got supporters of Bitcoin in the administration. It seems to me like Biden was a positive check. The entire set of administrative regulators are positive checks. Most of the noise around regulation is really just the altcoiners, right? The DeFi people, the security token people, the staking protocols, stablecoin issuers. They want to generate a bunch of noise. Regulators are hostile, but I can't see any activity in the past 6 months from a regulator that was, in my opinion, hostile to Bitcoin. I think that the politics right now are such that you kind of have crypto versus Bitcoin. You have all the altcoins versus Bitcoin. And generally, if the altcoins could drag Bitcoin into the debate, right? If it's bad for the altcoin, they want it to be bad for Bitcoin so that all the Bitcoiners will support their position. So I think you see a lot of that where people will try to recharacterize utterances by regulators as being bad for Bitcoin, when in fact they're not bad for Bitcoin. They're bad for security tokens, DeFi exchanges, unregulated crypto exchanges, NFTs, or something else, but not Bitcoin. I think the other dynamic you see here is a little bit of tension between the entrepreneurs that control the industry in the first decade and the institutions coming in the next decade. Everybody in the world agrees that digital currency is a good idea. I mean, the Chinese want digital currency. I think every country wants it. Even the US wants it. We just can't agree on whether or not you should be an FDIC and, chartered bank to issue it, and whether or not, what are the licenses you need to issue a digital dollar versus anything else versus an analog dollar. I think there's a lot of noise that's all about, will the entrepreneurs continue to be able to do business unfettered, or will they need to come public? Is it public investors or private investors? Is it public companies or private companies? Is it chartered banks or techno entrepreneurial banks? Is it onshore or offshore? I think that in the past 30 to 60 days, the thing that's surprising to me is actually there's so much general support for everything in Congress and the Senate. The narrative was they're going to ban it. I think that my observation is they don't want to ban anything, which actually means you have the administration in the middle, you have the politicians on the far, what is the word, liberal side, and then you kind of have Bitcoin maximalist on the other side, which is, to my mind, interesting. But I really think that what we're seeing is the system cracking on the fringe in Turkey, in Argentina, in all South America. The interest rates in Brazil are what, right? 9% right now? And the interest rates in Turkey have been 16, 15. So I think that in the developing world, you're going to see something different, right? If the US inflates at 14%, what people haven't really factored in, everywhere else, they're inflating 20% to 30%. The question is, what are the consequences? I think there are two really big trends, right? Which is people are going to snap up digital currency if it's available, as much as they can get their hands on, and they're going to snap up digital assets, a la Bitcoin. It won't be like everybody, because to your point, there's so much stubbornness, there's so much inertia. You're really telling me that people are believing in the Lebanese local currency. Even today, there'll be some governments that resist reality and they collapse, and maybe they collapse into civil war, or they just collapse into chaos. And there'll be some governments that fight, resist, struggle, and eventually reconfigure themselves after great deals of pain and agony. And there'll be some governments that look at the world and they transform themselves in an agile fashion. And maybe they don't get through without stress, but they morph into something different and accommodate the world. Right? What happens if a small country, the best example would be, what if a small country that still has a currency starts printing the currency to buy Bitcoin? The first one, right? There's a little bit of room, right? Like what if UAE or Saudi Arabia, what if they were to go and just start buying Bitcoin with their currency? Like how long in theory, couldn't you, if you ran a country like Emirates, couldn't you go ahead and buy billions, 2, 3, 5, 10 billion of this before anybody noticed, and it might never weaken your currency, right? I mean, a good model to consider is Norway and Sweden and other sovereign wealth funds, right? You've got regressive, you've got Cuba and Venezuela, right? And North Korea, and they're not really good at embracing property rights. And then you've got the middle of the road conventional, and their central banks are holding, US sovereign debt or gold, but mainly just sovereign debt. And then you've got progressive nations, and Norway is one. Norway's got a massive equity portfolio, right? Switzerland's got a massive, they didn't use gold, they actually used big tech as a store of value. KSA and UAE, in fact, all of the Middle Eastern countries, they generally have sovereign wealth funds that are holding diversified portfolios of property, including equity. They own banks, they own big tech. Sometimes they own like tons of property, real estate, REITs, not to mention commodities, right? Oil, right? Like mineral rights and the like. And so everybody has free will, right? Like MicroStrategy can do what it did. Like MicroStrategy stock was 120 and then we flipped and it's up by a factor of 5. And what did? We basically bought some Bitcoin and then we started issuing stock to buy Bitcoin. Isn't that the same as a country buys some Bitcoin and starts issuing currency to buy Bitcoin, right? What happens if UAE buys $10 billion of Bitcoin and the price of Bitcoin then increases by a factor of 20? Next thing you know, they've got $200 billion worth of Bitcoin, and everybody in the world knows they've got $200 billion worth of Bitcoin. I think the point here really is you can spend a lot of time fantasizing about how you never want any banks to buy Bitcoin, and you never want any companies to buy Bitcoin, and you never want any governments to buy Bitcoin. And since they're not going to ever buy any Bitcoin, you're the enemy of the banks and the companies and the government. You see that narrative. Banks are the enemy of Bitcoin. Companies are the enemy of Bitcoin. Not your keys, not your coin. The government's the enemy of Bitcoin. But the other possibility, which just turns the entire thing on its head, is how would you feel if you woke up tomorrow and you found out that Goldman Sachs did buy $10 billion of Bitcoin and UAE bought $20 billion of Bitcoin? Would you be angry? By the way, your Bitcoin would be trading at like $4 million of Bitcoin. And you could be angry and say, no, give that back to us. I want to go back to $50,000 Bitcoin. Look, if institutions weren't involved in Bitcoin would be trading at like 8,000 right now, right? Yeah. If you look at, the last 18 months, you could we could unwind that and you go back to $8,000 Bitcoin, or you can move forward, but it's just a taste. What's my big point here? It's like nobody can predict how the future will evolve except to make this one observation. People are generally rational and they take the path of least resistance. At some point, it's possible that someone's going to buy the Bitcoin, not because they agree with your most extreme vision of no governments and no companies and living together peacefully in one world currency. Maybe that's not why they're going to do it. Maybe they just want the money. I think that everybody loves a winner. Bitcoin's a winner, and the winning strategy is let everybody win with us. Everybody can win with us. I don't care what government, can governments win? Yes, all of them. Even the ones I don't like. Can companies win? All of them. Can the banks win? Yeah, sure they can. You don't like that company because they censored this thing? No, they could still win.